Today on this episode, I speak with Kevin about design and procurement in the interior design industry, rebranding your company, the importance of working on the business and not in it, starting a business out of frustration, the difference between interior design in the UK and Canada, the importance of mentors and business coaches, and uncovering your unique ability and integrating it into your business. This is a great episode. Make sure you listen right to the end. Hello and welcome to today's episode of Constructive Conversations. The intention of this podcast is to explore the mindset and actionable strategies that empower entrepreneurs to achieve holistic success while inspiring listeners to confidently pursue their own ambitious dreams. The reason I do this podcast is because 10 years ago I knew I wanted to start a business, but I had no idea where to start and no role models to follow. The goal now is to provide that inspiration for new entrepreneurs and provide fuel for those who are already doing it. Joining us today is Kevin Gray, principal at Studio Ridge, which provides interior design and architectural feasibility studies, specializing in custom timber frame homes throughout Canada and internationally. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
So let's get right into it. Can you tell us what your company looks like today, and then maybe we'll work backwards to get your origin story of how that company came to be?
Sure. So today we are a team of 8 core people. We have our company split into sort of 2 divisions. We've got the procurement side and we've also got the design side. So on the design team, we have myself and 3 core people on the private client homes. We have another person who is in the procurement side really, but she also does design work. Our business is split into 2 divisions, essentially, what I'm calling the furniture procurement and show home division, and then the private client division that does a lot of the timber frame homes as well as other types of projects.
Awesome. And how long have you been running Studio Ridge?
Well, the business as a whole has been operating for 14 years, just over 14 years now, but we rebranded as Studio Ridge in December of 2022. And the reason why we rebranded was twofold, really. When I started the business way back 14 years ago, I couldn't think of a name that I wanted to use. So at the time that I called the business Kevin Gray Interiors. Very exciting name. Didn't take a lot of creativity to figure that one out. And as the business grew over time and organically, I decided that I didn't think it was right for it to be continuing under my name when I had a design team now who were handling a lot of the projects as on a day-to-day basis, basically, while I was still involved and still am involved with these larger projects especially. I wanted to rebrand so that we could have a name that was maybe a little bit more reminiscent of our niche that we're in, especially the timber home marketplace, as well as so that it wasn't my name over the door. So that 2 reasons for that. So that one is that if somebody's coming into the business, they're not just instantly saying, I want Kevin. And secondly, because with a exit plan, I wanted to be able to have the business not just under my name, therefore it's easier to sell.
That's very interesting. I also rebranded from Nick's Carpentry, a very creative name, to what we are now. Yeah, for the same reasons, right? So people aren't asking for Nick, and then if the business sells, it doesn't have to be to somebody called Nick. So that's a good strategy. And so your role there is principal, and I have to tell you, I really like that. When we met a few months ago, I think now, you gave me your business card that said principal. I stole that. I ripped off principal, and I said, I want to be the principal here. So I've changed all my email signatures because I thought that was great. And it covers a broad scope. But what does your role look like in day-to-day operations?
Well, that's the thing, because it is many hats, right? So, I ultimately, as you know, the business owner is really responsible ultimately for everything. But of course, I have things delegated throughout the company, but I'm still touching on a daily basis. I'm still touching things like marketing. I'm still touching base with my accounts office manager and accounting specialist, Norma. I'm dealing with the design team on design projects. I'm dealing with the marketing. I've got a gal that just does marketing for us. And so I'm dealing with her on a near daily basis. And so it's sort of like you're touching every part of your business. But my role when we're not in periods of extreme busyness, you know, the whole thing is that it's still a small business that I have, and the challenge is are you working in it or are you working on it? And so, of course, my goal is always to be working on it. And I will say that it probably took me a few years after starting the business to realize that it's more important to work on the business than to work in it. And of course, that's why you need good staff and good people and good team players. But I would say that I am always working on it, but what we have found in our past summer season into the fall, we had probably the busiest summer and fall season we have ever had. And with that said, I was pulled away a bit from the working on the business. Not that I never stopped working on it, it's just that I didn't have the same time ability to be doing that more aggressively.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I hear that when it gets busy, it starts to sort of draw you and your time more into the business. So take us back to 14 years ago when you were starting the company. What was sort of, your training or your mindset coming into that, and what caused the decision to actually start the business?
So this is where I know I'm not the only one in this, and that is that it was really born out of frustration. So I'm now in my mid-50s. I was in my early 40s, and I was working for another very good, reputable design firm here in Calgary. And I had helped that firm build a portion of their business up. But the connection that I had to the owner of that firm, because they were genuinely busy with another portion of their business. It was a firm of like nearly 40 people, so it was not a small firm. And legitimately, that person who was running the firm did not have the ability to always see what myself and my team were doing in terms of growing this new arm of their business in the residential realm. And so I just thought, I've put a huge amount of effort into doing that. I could be doing that for myself. And synergistically, at the same time, I had some personal friends who here in Calgary who were going to flip homes, but do it as a structured business. And so they offered me the opportunity, like, could you come and do the design work for us? And that's kind of how it all started. So I used that as a stepping stone, and they knew that I was doing that. I didn't just work for them as an employee. I started my own business, Kevin Gray Interiors, and essentially for the first number of months, they were my sole client. And then they were very gracious in allowing me the ability to sort of build my business on the other side of it. And so gradually I took on more of my own private clientele and started, right then and there I got my first timber home out of that in the first year of having my own business. And so that's kind of how it all began. Prior to all of that, of course, I already had nearly, counting the decades here, nearly 28 years of experience prior to that in the interior design world, be it in facilities management, which I did for a number of years, be it working in the UK, which I did for a number of years in a private residential firm. And I also worked for corporate office interior design firms. And that might seem like a very disparate and very different sort of genres to be working in, but it was really good grounding for me to be able to see different ways throughout the industry of how design is done. So because I did end up spending quite a bit of my years in the corporate office interior design side and like some commercial interior design projects, as well as in facilities management side, I did see how processes could be applied from those elements of the business brought into a higher end residential type business. I knew from a fairly young age that I always wanted to get into the design of homes and to do, whether that was interior design or architecture. I went to SAIT and I took the architectural technology course a year after I got out of high school. And I thought I wanted to do architectural design. And so that's kind of how I came at interior design, is I fell into interior design because as I got out of college and was going to my first job, the only place I could find was an architect's office. And then that was a couple of years there. And then I went to a corporate office interior design firm. And I was doing technical drawings, but that's kind of how I fell into interior design. And one of my employers early on recognized that I had the design skills. So I then went back and took sort of like, that was before a lot of online learning was a thing. So I took like sort of, distance learning programs for interior design. over a number of years, and I realized I wanted to get into residential design. Worked in facilities management while I was doing all residential on the side. Worked in facilities management here in Calgary for 10 years, and then realized I really need to push my residential experience here. So because I'm a dual citizen, I was born in the UK, I had the opportunity of moving to the London area in the UK, and I worked there for 4 years with a very boutique, high-end residential design firm, sort of learning the ropes on that, and then came back here, and things flowed from there.
Uh-huh. So can you talk more about living and working in the UK? So is interior design there, very different from Canada? Did you bring back, lessons and designs from there? Yeah, how is that, the difference stack up?
So I would say, making a general statement, I would say nowadays in the world that we live in, there is a more universal focus on design. And yes, you do see regional differences and you do see some cultural differences, but compared to 20 years ago, there's a little bit more similarity. I'm not saying sameness, I'm saying a little bit more similarity in certain zones. What I would say about my experience in the UK is what it helped me to understand is that the UK takes the best of what's very traditional and mixes it with the very modern. And that, I think, comes out of the fact that a lot of their homes over there are genuinely historical homes. I had the opportunity of working on what they call listed buildings, which are like basically a heritage designation. But listed buildings have different categories, and I worked on buildings that were like 300 years old, homes, I mean. And in those homes, sometimes we did a completely different, like very modern concept on the interior. Other times we went a little bit more transitional with traditional touches as well as modern. But so that's what I would say, what I learned from the UK is with Europe itself is generally more modern, cleaner lines, what the whole Scandinavian design movement looks like. But there's a lot of that in Europe. And so the UK sort of blends the both, I would say, bits of North America and traditional design with more contemporary. So that was a interesting way of looking at it, and helped me not to be so narrow-minded about if the house is traditional, therefore the interior must be traditional.
Very interesting. And during that period, did you have any mentors? Like, who are your mentors, and who are they now, if they're still people you're learning from?
So back when I was working in the UK, I didn't really have any mentors per se outside of the people that I worked most closely with. Mm-hmm. So I would say in the UK, and maybe it's not so much a mentor thing, but the one thing that I guess I learned on the job in the UK is that for the interior design side of the business, I learned a huge amount about furnishings and especially drapery and window coverings. If you want to go somewhere to learn about drapery and window coverings, go to the UK because they have that cornered. Still to this day, here in Canada and in the city of Calgary, it drives me up the bloomin' wall that even although there are some really good drapery workrooms here, none of them can match what you get in the UK. And I find then what that means is a lot of designers here in Canada and in Calgary have the false impression that, a barely lined drape is somehow lovely. And it's because they don't know what they haven't been exposed to. So I guess I see from that, I've been sort of mentored on that sort of aspect of things, learning about the drapery window coverings in the UK. Nowadays, and since the early days of my business, I have certainly sought business coaches and mentors. And so starting like 10 years ago, I was using a business coach to more help me, like, how do I grow the business? What do I need to think about? How do I bring on staffing? And I'm a big one for always looking at finding online on YouTube, other places, looking for just general webinars for the design industry. And there's a lot of them out there. And so there's a lot of, coaches and mentors you can get. So over the years I've dipped into different things like using a network of other like-minded designers here in Calgary where we wanted as a group, we were all technically starting at the same time in our businesses and we wanted to get some mentorship. So we went out to this other company and said, can you please come to Calgary and give us a 2-day training session, which we did. So that was one example of that. That was just like a one-time thing. But then I've done coaching as well, where it might be a series of months of coaching. And I've done that several times throughout the business's history. But bringing right up to today, I'm now doing this again because I feel that, it forces you as a business owner, when you're in the process of doing this coaching and investing in coaching, it makes you think more seriously about what's coming next. And so right now I have another business coach who's helping us with some sales and marketing refinements, as well as basically just helping me on a personal level with better focus for the administrative side of things. But then apart from that, I have some true mentors now. So I have reached out through my industry contacts, and I'm dealing with the managing partner of a larger firm in the northern USA. They also do architecture and interior design, but their firm is like 50 people. So compared to us, but the thing is, the similarity is they're in a similar niche. So we both do homes in the Mountain West, basically, of Canada or the States. We both firms work in both zones. I'm just trying to get some tips and tricks from them as to, like, you know, he sees my business as a small entity, so we're not competition to him in that sense, but how can he add value by helping me see what they've learned? So I'm doing a bit of that right now. And that's true mentorship. That's like once per quarter, meeting for about an hour and a bit, and it's usually me that has the homework, and I'm just going back to him with that. I'm in the process right now of reaching out to a second architect that I've also met through the projects that we've been working on to ask for the same thing. Because what I feel is sometimes it's really good to get two different opinions, two different points of view, and two different firms who have structured things differently. So what it does for me then is that what I get out of it is it opens my mind to different things. How do people do things? So I'm a big believer in what I call possibility and potential. When you drill down what I really am all about in my life and business, it is opening people's minds to possibility and revealing potential. So if I'm not doing that for myself, then I'm failing as a business owner, because you want to expose yourself to how things could be done, how are other people doing them, and then you take from all of that and then apply it to your business to make the necessary tweaks and pivots to move forward more successfully.
I really like that, opening people's minds to possibility and potential. How did you narrow in on that statement? Like, yeah, how did you come to that? Because that seems very focused.
It is very focused, and it might sound fluffy, but it's not. So how I did that, so this goes back to not long after I started my business. And a thing about me is that because I have a side of me that's analytical, so I like doing these kinds of assessments, right? And going back to, for example, personality typing, I've done the Myers-Briggs personality typing, once every 5 to 10 years, and it usually always comes out with the same profile, which is ENTP, which is classic entrepreneur. But I wouldn't necessarily call myself an entrepreneur, because an entrepreneur, from the pure actual definition of the word, you're doing something different that nobody has done before. I'm a small business owner, and moving that business forward, I might have entrepreneurial thinking in terms of trying to do things differently, but the actual core of what I'm doing isn't really different in the industry, if you see what I'm saying. So that's kind of my thing. But because I like doing these kind of assessments and self-assessments, over the years I've done different things, and I did one where it was like sitting down and going over your life, whether it's work or job, and saying, okay, what are the tasks that I have liked doing? And of course, apart from design, of course, being a big one, like designing things, but then why do I like design? Okay, why do I like residential design specifically? And why do I like that compared to commercial design? Well, commercial design, you're working usually for the owner of a company or a facilities management person inside a corporate business. None of them have the same level of emotional connection to that business. And I realized that for me as a person, I like to be able to feel where I get my sense of fulfillment in doing design is when I'm doing it in the residential realm, because you're generally then working with a homeowner. And while that relationship can be a bit more emotive over the lifespan of it, ultimately I feel more I feel I get more self-fulfillment out of that more personal relationship, because you've literally touched somebody in their home and help open their minds to possibility and potential of how they can live, right? But then how did I get to that in other parts of my own life? Well, when I was a younger person in my 20s, I used to really like organizing outings, whether it be a bunch of kids from families that I knew, or people my own age, and I was the one that always was the organizer. I like to organize the camp trip in the summer. I like to organize the road trip to Vancouver with 5 different people. And so once I started doing this, and often the people that I was doing it with is friends from the UK, because I've got a strong connection from there because I was born there. So I think when I was analyzing all of that, it was like, okay, that was also opening people's minds to possibility and potential, because they had never been here before. I was acting like the tour guide, and that to me was quite, again, fulfilling, because I liked doing the work of researching where we would go, how we would do it, what we would use to get there, what would be the experience that they would enjoy. And it's no different in principle to the experience that we're helping the client enjoy when we're going through the process of interior or architectural feasibility design. And so that's kind of how I arrived at that. It was a book that actually helped me do it. If I'm not mistaken, the book that I read probably 25 years ago now was probably called, I think it was called What Color is Your Parachute? And it forces you to think on things like, where would you like to live? Why do you have the job you do? But it's asking questions. It drills down more to the root of why it is exciting for you.
Oh, that's great. And that actually sounds like I recently read a similar book. It's called Unique Ability, and it walks you through several personal assessments, asking people around you, what am I good at, from an external perspective. But yeah, that's really interesting. And how long ago did you go through that work, to bring out what actually provides the fulfillment for you?
I think I probably started it about 25 years ago, and then I revisited it again. And that was when I was in the UK. And then I revisited it again. So I started my business in 2010. So I probably revisited it again probably in the early teens of the 2000s, and sort of revisited that again, because it just helped me. It helps me focus what is my sort of like, purpose, if you will, in a secular sense. But what helps me then make a decision? It's basically a way of filtering decisions, because if it's something that will help me support my need to reveal possibility and reveal potential, if it helps me do that, then it's an easier decision to make, right? So it's basically it's probably, I guess, a value part of my value system, which, by the way, is another big thing that I'm redoing right now. I'm reworking through what are my values, because I do believe that in life and business, it's take like a marital relationship. If the overlap between the two parties does not have enough similarity in the value structure, I mean, no two people have the exactly identical values in all cases, but you need to have enough of those values overlapping, right? And so that's something that I'm looking at right now, so that, and I'm going to be trying to do that with my staff that I have around me, to see, like, where do we have the synergies, where do we have the conflicts? Because when you're now trying to, in my case, now trying to take, and I've got an established team that I want to retain as much as possible, because with that builds in maturity over time, and then that enables you to take on that many more complex projects, or maybe even greater volume of projects once you've got the skill set, there. But in terms of like training people up in a company, they need to understand what my values are. And if there isn't enough overlap with them, there could be conflict, right? So I'm going through that again right now for myself first, to analyze and reassess what my values are, because that, as a business owner, should definitely be, as you're bringing somebody new into the team, it's something that I've now resolved, and I've not really done this specifically before. I would say that a lot of people I do have on my team do have some overlapping values with me, but I would say that as I'm now hiring, it's one thing I'm going to try and fold into my hiring process, where I'm looking at right off the get-go, what is that person's values? And you can give them a couple of different diagnostics that they can do to do that. It's fairly easy to do. And I'm going to be considering that as my onboarding process, because again, our business is established, and we have been growing, but we need to go up one level, where I would say there's just that, I'm not sure exactly what to call that level, but it's a slightly one step up in the maturity of the people in that business, to enable the business itself to establish itself even more firmly as a leader in its market.
Very interesting. And so you mentioned at the beginning that your team is made up of team players. Can you talk a little bit about how you screen, recruit, hire those team players that you mentioned?
Yeah, so I guess here's how I've done it traditionally in the past, is that I don't follow very corporate formulation for doing this. First of all, when I'm looking for people, before I put out any advertisements on LinkedIn or Indeed or any place online, even, through a newspaper online or whatever, I always ask around in the industry, because as you already know, the construction and design industry in Calgary is a pretty small industry, right? Here in the city. And in fact, it always has been. And so what you find is that I already know a lot of other interior design contacts that are also owners of their businesses. I sometimes reach out to them, say, hey, you know of anybody? Because sometimes they might have been approached by somebody that they can't hire them right now because they don't need the person. Or they felt it wasn't maybe the right fit for their specific business, but there's nothing wrong with the person, right? So basically, I start there because I really believe that it's who you know, and we're in a relationship industry, right? So if I can get a referral to somebody that way, that's where I'll start. If that doesn't pan out and there's nothing coming from there, then I will put the ad in, which I find really challenging in this day and age because these online services are used by people all around the world. What we then find we have to do is weed through even although it might state in my application must be Alberta or Calgary based, right? And you'll get people from all over the world applying, and then you've got to weed through all of that, realizing that they still live in these countries and they're just looking for a free ride over here. Mm-hmm. And so basically we filter through. But to come back to the actual process is that when I start with hiring and interviewing, I usually do it in like a staged thing. I might start by a meeting I usually always start with a Zoom call or some kind of a video call, and that helps that person who's interviewing and us who are doing the interview assess, is this person, should we take this further? And then if we do, we'll then have the person come and we'll do an in-person meeting, either sometimes with just myself and or with members of my team. But we usually do at least 3. So the Zoom call and at least 2 in-persons, because I just feel that you need to get a bit more of a flavor of the person and they need to get a better flavor of you. And so because we are a small business, I want to make sure that the people we're bringing in also have some kind of a synergy with the other people in our business. Now, I've done it before and I've made mistakes, because all business owners do, and I've brought somebody in who ultimately wasn't the right fit for the business, even although we thought there might be a fit earlier on. But so we do like I would say we've talked to that person at least 3 times, 2 of which are in person, sometimes even 3 in person before we move forward. And I try to do it as informally as possible. Yes, we do ask some specific questions, but I don't want my company to ever become too overly corporate in the way that we do the hiring process.
Okay, that's a great answer. I'm sure that'll be helpful to people. So you talked about making hiring mistakes. What if, just looking back over your business journey, what's sort of one of the biggest obstacles or challenges you've had to overcome?
Well, I think the first challenge I had to overcome was you need people. So when you're a small business operator, and when I first started my business, I knew right out of the starting gate my process that we've adopted in the business is, like I said, a more architecturally informed process as to how we do things. And so as a result of that, we do a lot of interior design drawings, more than some other designers might do. So right at the starting gate, when I started my own business, when it was just me, I did have a subcontractor who did my drafting as and when was needed. And now and then I would hire like a junior designer to help me like source certain materials if I didn't have time to do it. So I always did have people helping me, but I kept saying, you can't afford to employ somebody. You can't afford to employ somebody. You can't afford it. Eventually, after about 3 years of this, the switch got flipped, in my head. You can't afford not to, right? Mm-hmm. Because when we are in a business where that person's time is predominantly time billing based, the position mainly pays for itself, right? So basically, once the switch got flipped in my head, that was probably the first hurdle to overcome. That it's not about you can't, it's about you need and you must in order for the business to move forward, right? So that was probably a quick learning exercise by trial by fire on, you can't dwell on what you can't do or this sort of negative thinking. It's got to be that you need this in order for the business to grow, and to see it from that perspective, first of all, more of a top level view. So that was one learning experience. Other learning experiences was just as the company has now started to grow, there is sometimes a temptation to hire either a specific person or to hire to a specific position without necessarily waiting for the right person, right? And so in this industry, especially for the past 3 or 4 years, as most people will attest to, at least on the design side, I'm not sure about you guys on the construction end, but so many great people already snapped up because there's been such a boom in the demand for that. And so it's just challenging to find qualified people. That's basically my message. And so sometimes you might go with somebody who's maybe more junior and then you're training them up. So that's the other learning thing I will mention. There are several seminars that I have sat through over the past 10 years, specifically geared to the design and architecture business. And so many of them say that, if you're a small business and you're a sole operator and you're trying to get your first hire a junior. Well, I disagree with that. And here's why. Because if you're a sole operator and you're the one doing all the work, when you hire a junior, especially if that person's like a junior designer who you are expecting to do some drawing work and sourcing work and they're fresh out of college, they need training. And so your time is then spent sitting there training these people. And while there's a benefit in that, which I'll get to in a minute, you're spending your time, which is then not billable, to train that person. And so that means that you're then working harder to do your end of the work, to make your end of the work harder. You're burning the candle even more at both ends to do that. So that to me is why I would say to somebody now, especially on the design side of the business, don't hire a junior first if you're a sole operator. It's fine to hire somebody who has less experience in any category or division of your business if the business, like mine now is a bit further down the road, where you're then, it's a little bit, there's less of an impact on the business for a junior to come in. And that's where there is a benefit. If a junior comes into a business where there's already, for example, the senior designer, myself, and there's maybe other some intermediate designers in the firm, or other senior people of some sort or level of maturity, then that junior can then be trained on how you want things done. So there's a plus point in that when a junior comes in then. But a biggest learning thing that I had was not to do that. So that was a mistake I made. Back in when I made my first full-time employment hire, it was somebody who was junior, fresh out of design college. And while they were keen, that was the issue. I was then burning the candle even more. So then when I started hiring again, and that person that I'm speaking about, by the way, moved away. And so when I did my next hire, I made sure it was somebody who was a little bit more intermediate level, had more years of experience under their belt.
That's really interesting you mentioned that, because I had the same lesson, and more in terms of hiring an apprentice versus hiring a journeyman, somebody with the experience, and exactly the same takeaway. You're better off hiring the journeyman, and I've made this recommendation to other trades, business owners. You want somebody who can work independently, who already knows how to get it done. So that's really interesting that the same rule sort of applies across different design, different related industry. So really cool. So you mentioned you're working on leveling up the business sort of to grow and expand and prepare for the future. So what does the future look like for you? What are you excited about in terms of what your company is doing and maybe what's happening in the industry?
In one word, diversifying. So we already are diversified in the sense that back in, I think it was 2015, I started taking on show home work. So a lot of our niche market still is a timber frame industry, but we managed to develop a really good relationship with just a production builder here in Calgary who does a lot of work around the city and environs. And so we already are niching into that on the other side of our business. So our procurement team essentially handles the show home work for the most part. And then the design team handles like the higher end private client work, which is mainly in the timber frame niche. So we're doing a lot of projects that are not local to us. So we're talking about the Mountain West. We're talking about lakes, lake country in BC, Shuswap. We've even done some stuff as far as long as New Brunswick. We've got a project right now in Maui, actually, and one in Texas, one in Idaho. So we've got the diversification there. Our goal has been, and starting this year, is to get more hospitality work and to get more multifamily work because of stabilizing cash flow. Because what you find is that if one area of the business has a lull, then you've got more types of revenue streams bringing cash flow in. And so in order to sustain a business that's now as established as mine, we need to have these multiple streams, because I don't want to just rely on private client work, because while the private client work really is our forte and that's the niche that we are in and always will be, the focus there is that once the arc of that lifespan of the project might be 2 or 3 years on these really large projects, from the time that we start till we finish, literally 2 or 3 years per project, sometimes longer. Suddenly, if that ends, you might then have a gap before another timber frame that's that significant comes along. So you need to have, diversification. In other words, the other reason for diversification is just because it gives the people in the company more exposure to different types of jobs, expands their own potential and possibility, right? It opens their mind to that possibility, their potential, expands their potential, and also expands their career options in the future, right? If they've got more different types of genres of projects they've been working on. And then also, thirdly, it's just, if there's people in the company, as we have now, that have some of that skill already, then they can take some of those things on. So this year, we've had a project for a restaurant. It's still in the early schematic stage, but it's likely, hopefully, going to take off soon. So we've got a restaurant that's coming on board. And then we're looking at doing multifamily. And we just completed our first lodge project in Fernie. It was mainly a furniture program for one of the existing lodges up there, a refresh to their furniture program. So we were doing all of that. So we're looking to do more of the same. So for all those reasons, it's how we need to, that's what will help take the company to the next level and keep it there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So then you avoid sort of, the roller coaster cash flow and then you can continually be at the high level and operating there. Awesome. That's really cool. Yeah, and so can you talk a little bit about your marketing strategy? What does that look like? You have customers sort of, all over North America. How do you reach out, or how do people find you typically?
That's a good question. So I told you before, we're in the relationship industry. And while I see that social media has a role in getting business, it is not the place to get business, at least not for us. Keep in mind that we're not selling a widget, we're not selling an ebook, we're not selling something that's small. We're selling services that are very significant in scale for the actual fee to the client, for the most part, right? Especially for these private client homes, especially the timber frame market. So the relationship that we have with the timber framers is very, very important, because they can become your source of referrals. And so, for example, we're a member of the Timber Framers Guild of North America, and that was just recently done. And while that in and of itself doesn't get us business, it helps expose you to, or us to, other timber framers that we hadn't met before. So we're currently expanding our network of the timber framers that we work with. And the ones that we have worked with in the past, we continue a relationship with, and they refer us. So all of that to say that while we first of all rely on the relationship, then they might check social media, they might see us on Instagram, they might see us on LinkedIn, whatever the case may be, Pinterest as well. And that's just sort of an added value to the client coming on board. It will give them it gives us a bit of credibility to the client. But did you want me to talk about the onboarding process, or just about the reaching out like I've just done?
Yeah, no, that's what I was interested in. Yeah, is reaching out. So you're saying you have the first layer of relationships with the timber framers, and then the clients sort of approach them, and then they send work to you. Yeah, that's really interesting, and especially because it's niche, right? There's, like you said, it's not a widget, it's not a small thing that you're selling. So you've dialed in that system to get in front of the right clients.
And then something else to mention is that I always wanted to niche into the timber home marketplace, because before I started my business, I had already done two or three timber frames prior to starting my own business when I was working for another firm. But the timber homes, it's difficult to get directly to that client, because how do you reach out to the homeowner directly, right? Mm-hmm. So we're right now at the process. This is partly why it's on my mind to have a podcast. It's been my goal now to look at doing that. And the purpose of that podcast would be more to sort of enhance and do some promotion of the timber frame industry in general. And so I would be interviewing people that are all involved with the timber home industry, even some clients who have finished a timber home project. Mm-hmm. And it would become like a resource for people looking to do that, right? And that's another thing that I do see myself as, many of us, and you included, we all are educators at some point with our clientele, and we're all guides to the clientele, and I really firmly believe in that, and I want to explore that even more, to not just see, you have to educate the client as to what is timber frame, because they don't really even know what that means in all cases. They just see the image, like this thing behind me here, right? And they see it looks cool and they want to do that, but they don't understand maybe what's involved in that and why it's such a different animal than a conventional home. So I'm seeing that I can use this podcast to help to develop people's understanding of what that is, because we do spend quite a bit of time actually at the beginning of a client relationship or potential client relationship, helping just to walk them through what is timber frame, and in hopefully a non-intimidating way, but helping them understand that they're biting off a totally different animal than a conventional home, and therefore they usually do need some guidance from an interior design, architecture, contractor, exactly all the way through the project.
Yeah, and that sounds like a great way to provide that education and just that resource you can point people towards, even if they're not sure, have that. Yeah, that'd be very useful. Yeah, and like you said, I think in any sort of area of construction, there's always a lot of education, especially with residential clients, that needs to happen to meet everybody's expectations.
Yeah. Okay,
I know you have a call coming up, so make sure we finish on time here. But I have some rapid fire questions, so just more short answers.
Okay.
If you were to write a book, what would it be about, or what would it be titled?
What would it be titled? You want this rapid fire? I don't know.
Or whatever comes to your mind.
It would be like James Herriot for timber frame. Do you know what I mean by that? James Herriot was the author in the UK who wrote All Creatures Great and Small, about his life as a vet in the Yorkshire Dales. Okay. And it's quite a humorous story, so I'd probably do that, where I talk about the good stuff and the hilarious stuff and the crazy stuff.
Awesome. Nice. I like that. That's a good answer. What is a top book recommendation for an entrepreneur?
I'm trying to remember the name of it. I'm looking to see if I had it here. Basically, it's a book on like kickstarting your thinking, and I forget what it's called. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. If you remember later, you can send it. We'll put it in the show notes. And I also wrote down what color is your parachute that you mentioned from way back. Yeah. Finding sort of your vision. If you could wave a wand and be free of any habit or like character trait, what would that be?
Overthinking.
That's a good one. And favorite or most used app on your phone?
WhatsApp.
Yeah, lots of communication. And then how do you unwind after a long day?
I really like walking. So in the summer months, especially, I have a dog, and right now I'm single. I'm in a relationship, but I am single at the moment. And how does that? That's kind of an oxymoron. I'm in a relationship but single. What I mean is, I live alone, and so I have a dog. So basically, I take the dog out for a walk, and that's one of the reasons why, because I like walking, and having the dog is the motivation to do it.
Nice. Would you still be walking without a dog? Like, do you like walking enough to?
Yeah, no, I still would be. It's just I wouldn't be doing it as frequently, right? I mean, but I should probably expand that a little more. You want a short answer? Sorry, too bad.
That's fine.
Is I like the outdoors, and so I would still go out walking. I love walking in beautiful parks. I live in the northwest area of Calgary. I walk in some of the parks in Varsity. I also walk in Bowness Park pretty frequently. And I would still do that without the dog or at all, because it's really just nice to get out in the fresh air. I love nature. And that's another reason why I should say I like timber frame, because so many timber frame homes are in beautiful mountain destinations or those kinds of things where you've got trees, mountains, hills, beauty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very nice. I was reading, and a lot of like great thinkers and authors and writers, like I think Robert Frost and lots of poets, and they found a commonality across them was that they all walked a lot. They all walked, all times of the year, very frequently. Very, very interesting. Okay, that's it for my rapid fire questions. Yeah, no, that's great. Anything else you want to cover on?
I'm going to ask you a question. So, how long have you had this podcast now?
I've been doing it just over a year. So August of 23 would have been episode 1.
So how has that helped you in your own business?
So it's in a lot of ways. And the podcast started out with a different sort of theme than what I introduced at the beginning. So originally it was just the construction industry, and I wanted to bridge gaps in communications between contractors and their customers. And so I started out talking to a lot of like business owners, and then I realized I love having these conversations so much, and I learn every time, that I wanted to expand it. I have other friends who aren't in the construction industry, but I said, I'm sure there's lots of people could learn from them. So I sort of expanded the intention there. So it's been really good. Even I talked to someone who owned a manufacturing company in Silicon Valley making microchips, and then he gave me some great advice on hiring, which helped me, take the next step in business. So it's been really useful, just like those little nuggets that everybody provides. And so the hope is that the listeners are also picking out those nuggets, even if it's an unrelated industry. There's something there they can take and apply to their business. So
those principles and practices. I think that sounds awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming on, Kevin. It was a pleasure to have you.
Well, same. My pleasure.
All right. Take care.
Thank you. Take care.